So hello, I'm making a video about the Green Knight because I just saw it for the third time. I realize now that there might be things that I'm going to get from a fourth watch that I'm going to probably wish that I could have talked about in this, but I also feel like right now when I'm thinking about it, I prefer just to get it out and cover all my bases because there's no problem with having an incomplete thought. Everything's a work in progress. I've decided it may be one of my favorite new movies, if not my favorite new movie, because I think it perfectly balances what I think are like the hardest things to do for storytelling, which is to balance sort of realism and artistic license and metaphor and symbolism. Because really, a movie that takes itself too seriously can sometimes be to its detriment. You almost can't focus on the themes, the moral of the story, because you are just questioning. Well, that's not really how it was. They could have made that jump if they really tried. I don't know about that. This is a story. Enjoy it, but almost keep in mind there's more to it. This is all intentional. This is all being told to you from another person. They're the transmitter, you're the receiver. So I like it because it operates on multiple levels. It operates as a story. It makes sense in general, as much as like a medieval knight fairy tale story makes sense. The movie, there's a story about him. He's a man. We open and he's in a brothel. There's things going on outside his window, but he's not barely paying attention. Things are getting worse and more serious, but he's asleep. He's sleeping in. So a couple of those opening lines are really telling, just like him being like, I'm not ready. What's the rush? Where are we going? The basic plot of the movie is that there's this knight that doesn't have anything to his name. He's never done anything. He's going there to hang out with other knights on Christmas Day and party. And his mom, Morgana? The witch skips out. Instead of going, she goes on and hangs out with her witchy friends. At the party, he goes and King Arthur is there with his wife, and he tells someone to go get Garwin to come and hang out with him and talk with him. And he's like, hey, I regret that I've never actually gotten close to you. I'm going to correct that. Why don't you come here, sit by me, and tell me about yourself so I can learn more about you? And he's just like, there's nothing to tell, I've never done anything. And the queen is just kind of like, yet. So as his mom was hanging out with her witchy friends and summoning this knight, he shows up at the Christmas party. And he shows up, rocks up to all of the knights. They all draw their swords. Arthur gives a look to Merlin, or someone who would be presumed to be Merlin, and he looks over at him, and Merlin sort of like stops, and there's like this red glow that takes over him, and then he looks back and he shakes his head as if to say, he means no harm. And then he lets the knight come in to talk with him. The knight just walks up, gives him a letter. The queen takes it instead and reads it, and his voice sort of comes through her where he's saying, I'll challenge you to a game. One of your best knights can come kind of strike me. If he does, he'll get my axe, my magical, awesome axe. And then in a year's time, he'll ride north and meet me again, and I'll sort of return the favor, and then we'll part as friends. Garwin volunteers. He takes the king's sword, and he's not really sure what to do, but the knight just puts down the axe and sort of presents himself as if, go ahead, take your blow. And so he chops off his head. The knight picks up his head, reminds him that he's got 1 year hence, and he rides off laughing. A year passes, and he goes on his adventure to go back and sort of complete the game, complete the story. Throughout watching it the first time, you don't know what's going on, and it seems kind of aimless. You're also kind of like, what kind of game is this? Like, you hit me, I hit you. Cool. It's like the rules seem very arbitrary, but at the same time, it seems very true of like old-timey stories or fantasies. It's just like, let me lay out the rules. These are the rules, and we follow them, and that's sort of the end. Another scene that was important was when he finds the specter, the lady that wants, or St. Winifred, who needs to get her head back. At first she's like, I need to get my head back. And he's like, oh, it's on your head, or it's on your shoulders, which is, it looks like it is, but it's not. It's super obvious at first that she's like a ghost or a specter, but he feels the need to ask, and she seems like that's a stupid question. He also tries to touch her, and she also is like, why don't you get this? Like, stop. A real knight would know not to do this. Also, when he returns her head, she says something I couldn't quite hear, but at the end she says, the Green Knight is someone you know. When you put that angle on it, like, if the Green Knight comes from the mother, inevitability of life and death, by giving him life, she is sort of putting him on a path that no matter what is going to lead him there. Everything's sort of pointing him either towards his destination that's inevitable, or trying to derail him and trying to like sort of push it off and ignore it. Then he meets, or he falls down and he's saved by this dude who wakes up in a castle, and it's this dude, his wife, and I don't know, some old lady with a blindfold on, just like his mother wore in her seance. Why don't you hang out here? I'll go hunt, and then whatever I bring back, we'll share, and you'll sleep, you'll eat, you'll be ready for this contest, and then you go do what you need to do. The wife kind of flirts with him. Also, the wife is played by the same actress that plays his like prostitute friend earlier in the movie, which there's a couple different ways you could take that. Not that they're necessarily the same thing, but they might play a similar role as far as the universe or whatever, or the world, or the story. Anyway, she tempts him, he gives in, but he doesn't consummate, he doesn't finish the job. He spills his seed on his sash, this magic sash that was stolen from him and brought back by her. It's actually a weird scene where the prostitute had given him a bell to remember her by, the love, and when he meets this woman, this temptress, she asks him what the bell is for, and he's basically like, it's nothing. So she's like, okay, well then I'll take it. It doesn't mean anything. And then later when she goes to tempt him, she brings the sash that his mom had made for him and says that she made it. As long as he kept it, he'd be safe. Anyway, after he sort of shames himself by not resisting temptation, he runs off, and then the husband sees him and is sort of like, hey, we made a deal, like you're gonna give me what you get, and goes up and kisses him, and he I guess denies him. He meets the Green Knight, ends up having to wait because he showed up too early after fleeing his shame. He has to wait until Christmas Day for the knight to sort of be like, alright, it's the day? Alright, time to chop you up. And he flinches 3 times. He tries to just take it like a man and submit to what he agreed to in the first place by accepting the game. And he runs away. And there's this whole thing where he runs home. He's knighted. He has a baby with his prostitute, but he takes the baby without her. He marries this foreign white princess that he set up with. There's a war, his son dies, everyone kind of looks down on him, like they know that he didn't really, almost like they're ashamed of him, he didn't really do what he said. And then in the end, his kingdom's overtaken, and he finally gives up his sash, his protection, and his head falls off. And then it comes back to the end where it's all just a vision, it's sort of like a possible future that he could have lived, and thinks about what would happen if he goes back and he pretends that he's the hero, that he faced death and came back, he bested it. That the entire time everyone else is kind of disappointed in him, and also he looks extremely perturbed, uncomfortable, and bored. Sort of like, even though you're watching this story like a prophecy, it's almost like in the story you can see the fact that he saw the story in the first place and he's living through it anyway, and he's sort of bored. He's like, this is it. This is all there is. This can't be. Maybe things will get better. Nope, that's exactly what I thought. And in fact, when he comes back to reality, when he comes back to the present moment, he asks the knight, he's like, wait, is this really all there is? Sort of pointing out to the fact that, like, one, maybe for some people, the movie, that's all there is. There's no more to the story, there's no twist. But also, for life, I feel a lot of us have that feeling where we're just like, is this really all there is to life? Is it just being here? Birthday parties, relationships, funerals, going to work, war, fighting, is this all there is? And the Green Knight, the symbol or the person goes, basically, what else would there be? Like, what would you expect? What else was there something else you were hoping for? That really, I think, is the most brilliant part. At the end, it's just kind of like, everyone's kind of asking what's important, like no matter what, you're going to get to the end. No matter what, you're going to be challenged. Fail or succeed, it's going to happen. It's inevitable. Even if you fuck up the whole way like he did, even if you lose or fail every challenge, you can still kind of go out with dignity. You can still sort of accept reality and who you are. And he does. He stops putting it off and stops just coasting and makes a real choice by accepting the inevitable, something he doesn't have a choice in. A very Sisyphus type thing. I don't know, I just think it's a story for the ages. I think it encapsulates all the themes so well. and just really that moment of facing oblivion, and you're terrified, but you do it anyway. You don't have a choice, but you do it with acceptance and on your own terms. He decides he's going to take it. He takes off the sash. He just gets in position for it to take his lashing, and the Green Knight congratulates him, and then says, "All right, it's time, off with your head." And that's the end. And it ends on a very quiet note, which I think is really off-putting for the first watch, because you're just like, okay. But what I appreciate with my second and my third viewing is that certain themes that were obvious the first time became much more fleshed out, which is like, this is clearly about growing up, accepting responsibility, coming to grips with mortality, and sort of like what the point of life is. Is it virtue? Is it works? Is it stories? Is it status? I also felt like this time, along my third time, there was a much more obvious complement of sort of like feminine versus masculine. His father is missing from the story. He leaves his mistress when she asks him to stay. He leaves his mother. The husband in the castle leaves also for his hunting and stuff. It's like, it's just a perpetual thing of like, men go, but they kind of neglect the more important thing. Who's waiting for them at home, their families. There's actually a quote earlier in the movie where the queen is like saying, may you follow these things, may the 5 wounds of Christ be your guide, may the 5 virtues of knighthood light your way, don't forget this. And each one of the tasks of the people that he meets sort of illustrates that, and each one he fails, except for possibly the last one, which is the question the movie leaves up to you, is like, did he win the game? And also, in my opinion, if life is a game, based on that rubric, did he win or lose? And also, who beat him? Because the Green Knight is this like creature that is summoned by his mother. You think it's sort of like a ploy for him to get greatness. Nothing's happening on his own, so she's got to like drum up this sort of like artificial way for him to get glory. But then she's also a mother and doesn't want him to die, so she creates the situation, but then she also wants him to come home safe. So she's got these conflicting motivations. Repeatedly, it seems like the women in the story have this connection to magic, to nature, to like almost paganism, and these masculine roles represent sort of Christ, and that's when this all starts. It's Christmas. While they're having their Christmas party, his mother's having her pagan seance worship party, bringing the Green Knight to come in and kind of mess with their fun. And then same thing with the Temptress. She asks him, what is it? She asks him, like, do you believe in magic? And he says, of course, it's around us all the time. And that's when she brings back the sash, and it's like, hey, I made you this. He's like, where did you find it? She's like, I made it. It seemed like there's almost like a hint that there is this sort of like oneness where like the male characters have sort of a similar journey and the female characters do, and they're always kind of relying on each other, but they're at odds. His mother summons the Green Knight. The Temptress brings back the sash to protect him. There's like an older woman character at the castle that's got a blindfold. She never speaks. I don't know what she represents, but she's just there. Also, when the Green Knight comes, it's the Queen who he speaks through. It's almost like she's the conduit for which this all begins. It's this, I don't know, it's this thing where like women are the life givers. They're where life comes from. And later on, the Temptress kind of goes over, it's not a poem, but she's just kind of giving like a monologue about the importance of green, that it's nature, that it's life, but it's also death, and that it's inevitable. That we think it's beautiful, but then when it creeps in, the rot or the moss creeps into our life, we try to scrub it out, we try to rinse and dry and avoid it, but it's always catching up to us. Also, she goes into this thing where green is the color that's left behind when passion dies, when you run from essentially from lust and love. And I felt like that sort of illustrated the returning theme of kind of leading responsibilities, also kind of like devaluing and leaving behind women. The whole crescendo of the story is like green's gonna eventually take over everything. It's gonna be on your gravestone. It's gonna grow over all. And I felt like there was sort of like a hidden like the future is female kind of moment, which I thought was really cool. I take into account this is a really old story, and concepts of femininity and masculinity are very kind of inherent and very symbolic in a lot of ancient and old-timey stories. So I'm not saying this is like a reality thing, but it's just kind of a cool theme that the story speaks to, that the movie speaks to, where power comes from and where it's valued and how it is. I love also that the game essentially is kind of pointless, and it's even brought up. The king's just like, remember, this is just a game. And later he asks again, like, what is this a big deal? Like, isn't it a game? And the king's like, well, perhaps, but it's not finished. You got to finish what you start. And I don't know. I guess at the end, the Green Knight is met in a green chapel, sort of a dual symbolism of green of nature and a chapel of, again, of the patriarchy, the Christ. So I didn't know at the end, one, did he win or lose, by whose rules, and who killed him? Was it the father? Was it the mother? Who did he more identify with? That is something I'm still not sure of, and I like that. Maybe I'll keep it that way. Maybe I'll keep thinking about it, and I won't. But also, I wanted to point out that I think this movie resonated with me extra hard because I'm 31 now. I've had I've had an interesting year. And I've kind of got to a place where I'm making plans for my future, not because I'm sold on like an absolute path. I never have been, I guess, but because I can feel the arc of my life moving and changing and evolving, and I want to collect more experiences and things that I'm gonna be glad I did by the end. I want to make sure I'm completing my lists, I guess, or my hopes for my life. So it was kind of funny that I think in the movie they sort of drum up like kind of an arbitrary nonsense task for him to do, but it doesn't matter that it's arbitrary. It's just important that there's something that he does, and they all kind of accept that. He just needs a story, so figure it out. Just anything will do. It'll come together no matter what, but just do something. And I could really relate to it, at least in this stage of my life, even though I'm not a young man without stories. I've got plenty of stories. Just the value in doing, and really that's kind of the point of life and of the story, is to have stories, to do it. Anyway, if anyone else has more thoughts about some of the things, symbolism that I didn't quite get, like if there's more to the bell that the prostitute gives him, if there's more to the blind grandma, the lady in the castle, if there's more to the wandering thief, because when he goes back, and at least it's in the vision, when he goes back to the castle, the thief is just kind of like hanging out in the same place, like nothing ever changed, even though he said he was going to kind of take over the story for him. Like he's like, don't worry about your quest, I got it for you. At least in the vision, we find him in the same spot. I didn't know if that was relevant or anything to anyone. Also, I liked the story. Nothing in the story is just a complete one-to-one metaphor. Because I don't think that would be true to any sort of those old-timey ancient stories, but it's not true of life, and it's just not very creative or interesting. If you guys have any thoughts, I think you should let me know. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I can, and I'm going to watch it again and see if there's anything else I can glean from it.